Thank you, everyone, so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm Aisha Wu, the Communications Officer for the Alberta Land Institute, and this is the second webinar in our lunchtime webinar series. The Institute aims to connect research and policy for better land management on Alberta's changing landscape. The goal of these webinars is to encourage knowledge sharing and discussion about a variety of land use topics relevant to Alberta and beyond. When speaking about land use, it's important to acknowledge that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. I'm going to pass it off to today's moderator, Dave Poulton. Dave is the Senior Advisor at the Alberta Land Institute. He is a researcher and consultant focusing on conservation policy and is currently a PhD candidate at the School of the Environment at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia, with his research focusing on federal Canadian perceptions of mitigation options in project development. Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks, Aisha. Today's topic is neighborhood greenhouse gas emissions in Edmonton. We're all too familiar with how cold weather affects our electricity bills, and last year we saw how temperature extremes can affect Alberta's electrical grid. But this increased demand for electricity may be affecting more than just our electrical grid. Our speakers today will discuss how temperature extremes, among other factors, are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions in high-latitude cities like Edmonton, as well as some potential solutions to that problem. Our speakers today are Sandeep Agrawal, Nilusha Welegedara, and Amit Kumar. I'll give you a brief bio of the three of them. Dr. Nilusha Welegedara is the research manager for the Urban Environment Observatory Lab and the Alberta Land Institute at the University of Alberta. She earned her PhD in land reclamation and MSc in animal science here at the university as well. Over the past year, she's been involved in various projects, including examining land reclamation in disturbed areas, studies on wildfires, urban heat islands, and greenhouse gas emissions in high-latitude cities. Her research interest focuses on understanding the effects of climate change on ecosystems and on society. Dr. Sandeep Agrawal is Professor and Associate Dean of the Faculty of Graduate and Postdoctoral Studies at the University of Alberta. He is also the director of the Alberta Land Institute. From 2013 to 2023, he served as the associate chair of the Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences and was the inaugural director of the School of Urban and Regional Planning. Dr. Agrawal's research interests are diverse, spanning sustainable urban and rural planning, migration, energy transitions, Indigenous issues, and human rights. He's received several multi-million-dollar national and international grants, including a recent grant together with Dr. Kumar. An accomplished author of over 100 articles, professional reports, and 3 books, Dr. Agrawal has significantly influenced planning practices, city bylaws, and legislation through a focus on human and Indigenous rights, equity, and justice. He has also received the Canadian Institute of Planners National Academic Award for his substantial contributions to planning and education and research in Canada. Dr. Amit Kumar is professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Alberta and a global leader on energy systems, the Canada Research Chair in Assessment of Energy Systems, Tier 1, and Deputy Director of Future Energy Systems here at the University of Alberta. He is also a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Engineering and Canadian Society of Bioengineering. Dr. Kumar has served on several international and national expert review panels and steering committees. He's been an expert witness to the House of Commons and the Senate of Canada for his expertise on energy issues and helped the Alberta government model hydrogen energy systems for the Alberta Hydrogen Roadmap. Dr. Kumar has received several awards, recognitions, including the 2020 Research Excellence Career Award from APEGA, the Association of Petroleum Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta. He's recently listed by Reuters in the Reuters Hot List, a list of the world's most influential climate scientists. We'll start out with presentations from Dr. Agrawal and Dr. Welegedara. My apologies, Nilusha, followed by a presentation from Dr. Kumar. The presentations will be followed by a Q&A. Throughout the presentations, you can add your questions into the chat, or later you can use the hand signal in order to indicate your interest in asking your question live. If you do post a question, please identify yourself and which organization you're affiliated with, and keep your questions brief so we have as much time as possible to consider the responses. Thank you. We'll turn it over to Sandeep and Nilusha.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave, for the introduction. So we'll share this presentation with Nilusha Welegedara. So I'll start off, and then Nilusha will take over. Again, thank you very much for coming. What we are presenting here is looking basically on Edmonton and focusing on household carbon footprint. Next slide, please. So we have developed a research program which focuses on high latitude cities across the world, but we are focusing at the moment on Edmonton and some of the other communities in Northwest Territories. One thing that comes up quite often is about the definition of a high latitude city. There is no exact definition, but they do have unique characteristics and obviously challenges that these communities face. Generally, these communities are above 50-degree parallel or even higher, but we are considering 50 or above as high latitude communities. Next slide, please. What makes high latitude communities unique? There are several uniqueness attached to them. One is obviously the location, and location then determines different seasons. So they tend to have long, cold winters, as you probably are experiencing currently, and short and warmer summers. So, as you know, in Edmonton, we are now seeing winter when it sort of temperature falls below all the way up to -40. And in summer now, we are hitting at times plus 37, 38. We see two extreme opposite temperatures. One other thing I wanted to say is that these communities are vulnerable to higher temperatures. The warming rate is way, way higher than the global average. It's 2 to 3 times, and that is contributing to some of these extreme weather conditions. Third thing is that these communities are experiencing significant urbanization. So the built-up area have increased in the last few decades, and which is, quite high for these places. And again, the visuals that you see on the slide tells you, what it looks like in July. That's the summer, and January, that's the peak of the winter. Next slide, please. So challenges are extreme weather conditions that require heating in cold winter days and cooling in warm and hot summer days. They largely rely on fossil fuel-based electricity generation. And again, I wanted to say, Edmonton, if you go across this latitude, we're talking about Stockholm, Helsinki, The Hague, and Moscow, and so on and so forth. So you get a picture of the area we're talking about. The density tend to be lower in these places, automobile-centric development, and very high per capita energy use. Next slide, please. So with these challenges in mind, we wanted to explore 3 research questions. What are the primary sources of household energy-related greenhouse gas emissions in a high latitude city such as Edmonton? And do these sources hold true across all residential neighborhoods? So that's first question. Second was more to do with the population characteristics and their effects on the greenhouse gas emissions in these cities, and specifically in Edmonton. And what are the possible ways to reduce the emissions in such a city? Next slide, please. So Edmonton, as you all know, those who are joining in today, it's northernmost, one of the largest cities with 1 million people or more, located between 53 and 54 parallels. It has number of residential and non-residential neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Just looking at the greenhouse gas emissions and their targets. So if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions in Edmonton, this is on the left side of your screen. City had a very high per capita emissions back in 2005, one of the highest at that time. And since then, city has made strides in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So if you look at the graph on the right side, it shows the emissions in the city of Edmonton since 2000. So you see a decline. So the measured emissions are indicated in brown color. So 25.6 back in 2005, 14.8 in 2022. So this is per capita. So in 2022, emissions did get reduced quite a bit. If we use the 2005 as a baseline, the target for 2023 was set at 11.9 tons per person, but we are at 14.4. So as you can see, a lot more needs to be done to reach that level of 11.9. Next slide, please. So now focusing on the neighborhood, because that's where our focus is. Residential neighborhoods are basically, we have divided them into two types. Mature neighborhood are the ones which were built before 2000, and they comprise about 95% of the city of Edmonton. And you see them in the red color or dark brown on your screen. The yellow ones or lighter color ones are the newly developed ones, which were built after 2000. So those are the two sort of broad categories of neighborhoods that we are looking at. Next slide. All right, so Nilusha, you're going to take it from here, right?
Thanks, Sandeep. So now let's quickly go through the method we use and the key findings we got through this research. In one of our previous studies, we identified two major sources of household related greenhouse gas emissions, or GHG emissions, that are dwellings and personal transportation. Therefore, we focus on these two variables. To calculate emissions from dwellings, we analyze the energy use and greenhouse gas emission intensities of 17,400 dwellings and consider the net flow area of each dwelling in both mature and newly developed neighborhoods. We considered single, detached, and all other types of residential units like single attached houses, duplexes, and apartments. Next, to estimate the emissions from personal transportation, we used vehicle kilometer travel data for each vehicle, along with the emission factors calculated by the City of Edmonton. The City of Edmonton and Natural Resources Canada kindly provided us the data. So we then combined the emissions from dwellings and transportation to calculate the total energy-related emissions and perform the required spatial and statistical analysis. We use several factors to analyze the relationship with greenhouse gas emissions. These include physical characteristics of neighborhoods that are net, flow area, mode of travel to work, transit access, and the number of commuters commuting less than 15 minutes. Also, we examine population characteristics, including median income, percentage of renters, and housing affordability of the neighborhoods. So now let's quickly go through the results addressing each research question. As you can see in the top graph, we found that dwellings are the main source of household energy related GHG emissions in a high latitude city. In the city, dwellings emit 45% higher emissions than emissions from personal transportation. Then we look at the differences between old, mature, and newly developed neighborhoods. As you can see in the bottom graph, the per capita emissions from dwellings and transportation show significant differences between the mature and newly developed neighborhoods. In the mature neighborhoods indicated by the red boxes, high emissions are from dwellings and low emissions are associated with the transportation. Conversely, in the newly developed neighborhoods indicated by gray boxes, high emissions are from personal transportation compared to those from dwellings. Each neighborhood type shows emission variation and outliers, so much deviation from the mean. So we wanted to map this variation. So when we map the emissions from residential buildings, personal transportation, and the combined values, we found significant variability in emissions across neighborhoods. The darker colors in the first two maps represent high emissions. The red color in the total emissions in the corner map represent the neighborhoods with more emissions. So then we conducted a hotspot analysis to identify areas with higher and lower emissions. This analysis helps us prioritize where to focus efforts for emission reduction. Red color indicates the hotspots, that neighborhoods with significantly higher emissions, while the blue colors indicate cold spots, that neighborhoods with lower emissions compared to rest. You can see in downtown and the surrounding neighborhood, we found that increased emissions from residential dwellings that link to energy leaks, which highlight the needs for retrofitting. We observed elevated emissions in the river valley area, especially in the southwest region. These hotspots are characterized by higher emissions from all the sources. This area tend to have more affluent residents, larger houses, and smaller household sizes. Also, there is a greater reliance on personal vehicles for transportation. So we perform additional analysis to better understand these findings. So we observed a strong influence of the size of the detached dwellings on emissions. Our analysis showed that the newly developed neighborhoods feature larger house sizes compared to mature neighborhoods, as you can see in this bar graph on the left. Especially new houses in the suburbs are on average 40% bigger than those in the mature neighborhoods. As you can see in the graph on the right, the energy use intensities per area that indicated by the black dots and trend lines has decreased over last 120 years, especially after 1990, especially in the detached homes, as in the top graph. However, during the same period, the size of the houses indicated by the red dots and trend lines has increased. As a result, emissions in newly developed neighborhoods have not decreased as much as expected. Now, quickly, let's look at the key factors influencing emissions from personal transportation. As shown in the graphs, the availability of public transport and proximity to workplaces significantly reduce emissions. In neighborhoods where a higher percentage of people commute in less than 15 minutes, as in the first graph, figure A, and have better access to transportation that indicated by the bus stop density, the emission tend to decrease when increase in the percentage. However, when more residents rely on their vehicles for commuting, as in the middle graph, emissions increase significantly. This reliance on personal vehicles is one of the main contributors for the emissions from personal transportation. Now, quickly, let's look at how do population characteristics affect emissions? As you can see in the first graph, when the median income of the neighborhoods increase, emissions also tend to rise. This is likely because residents in high-income neighborhoods often have larger homes and multiple vehicles, coupled with smaller household sizes. In contrast, as the percentage of the renters and the number of individuals facing housing affordability issues increases, emissions decreases. This reduction can be attributed to renters generally using less energy, living closer to their workplaces, and relying more on public transportation. With that, I pass to Sandeep to talk about the possible ways to reduce the emissions.
So there are a few possible solutions and to reduce the emissions, and Amit in his presentation will go more into details. But at the neighborhood level, what we are suggesting is mixed neighborhoods of different land uses. Certainly, we saw the floor area and how much it has increased per capita. So some reduction per capita floor area and perhaps curbing on the construction of monster homes that we are seeing. Obviously, providing more access to secure public transportation system. Green cover is important in neighborhoods in Edmonton. Encourage green energy sources, solar or other sources. Provide incentives for energy auditing and retrofitting, which federal government is providing. And then I think the important is the last one, the neighborhood level climate mitigation actions and plans and programs need to be in place because we do see variability from one neighborhood to the other. Next slide, please. So these are 5 key messages for you to take with you. First is high latitude cities such as Edmonton are facing significant detrimental effects of global warming. Buildings are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gas emission than personal transportation. Usually it's other way around in other cities in lower latitudes. Greenhouse gas emissions vary significantly across neighborhoods based on income and socioeconomic status. The fourth one that Nilusha alluded to is our lifestyle. We are looking for larger floor areas, which in a way undermines all the progress that has been made in improving energy efficiency, especially in the suburban areas of Edmonton. So what we need is a both top-down and bottom-up approaches and multiple level of interventions to combat this issue. Next slide, please. And this is the paper we have published. There are other papers, but this presentation is essentially based on the papers published. It's open access, so you can just Google it and find the paper. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sandeep and Nilusha, for that detailed discussion and then the results on the neighborhood level. What I'm going to talk about and is starting typically taking it to a little bit higher level. So we'll go to provincial level. That's where a lot of our work fits in, and then the higher level. So I'll talk a little bit about Alberta energy systems and where residential sector fits in the energy system. Decarbonization options. So mostly talk about the technologies for this. And also talk about some of the models that we have developed in terms of helping us in assessing these technologies, and then have some conclusions. So this is what we do. So we focused a lot on the technology assessment. So right at the bottom, we look at the technology and its characteristics, but we build models which helps us in developing this data. So a lot of process-based models for the technologies. We try to understand how these technologies penetrate into different sectors, in this case, residential sector, over a planning horizon of 20 to 30 years, so up to 2050. We are also looking at beyond 2050, but a lot of modeling in terms of understanding the penetration of these technologies in the residential sector. We go further up and try to understand the impact on the overall sector itself, so overall residential sector. And then how does it impact the energy system across the province? Because more electricity-based technologies, more electricity production need, more resources need. So the whole chain and the impact on the energy system we try to assess for any technology which is implemented, for example, in the residential sector. And then we take it to the country level. So basically from the technology developer, the information is transformed and morphed into basically the types of information which is needed for policy development and decision making. And this is where we sit in. So just to give you a sense of, what Sandeep and Nilusha talked about is this residential sector. But here, and this is Alberta's energy system. So everything that you see here, all the way from the resources that we have in Alberta, we transform these resources in the form of energy, so electricity, natural gas, petroleum, gasoline, which we use in different sectors. The focus here is on the residential sector, so where all this energy goes in the residential sector. So this basically what shows in terms of the residential sector. If we look at the Alberta level, about 8.5% of the energy goes in the residential sector. And that is what drives, the form of energy drives the GHG emissions that you have. And that's what, Sandeep and Nilusha discussed about the neighborhood. And that's for Edmonton. It would be similar for other jurisdictions to other municipalities too. But the key is that, we have about 80.5% of the energy consumed in the residential sector. If we go further down into the residential sector, so we try to understand where energy goes in the residential sector itself. And predominantly what you see that these are some of the high level end users in the residential sector. So space heating, we are in a northern city. A lot of energy goes in heating our homes. So space heating is a major one. If you look at space heating, so within the residential sector, the amount of energy that we use, 65% of that energy goes in space heating. So, and predominantly, most of these is provided by natural gas here. So just to give you a sense of, where major energy is consumed. This is on the transportation sector, but again, at the residential level now, 23% of the energy is consumed in the road passenger transport. Now, a portion of that is in Edmonton. It would be much less than this, but that's kind of, the sense in terms of what a portion of energy that we use goes in there. Because, when we think about the energy and the type of energy that we use, mostly we use gasoline and diesel. And that drives the type of technology that you implement to reduce your GHG emission. So with this, the type of options that I think, and typically we put these different decarbonization options in three baskets. First one is the energy efficiency improvement. So all the energy use that you do, you improve the efficiency, how we consume energy. So, Sandeep talked about energy auditing, energy management, retrofits. Those all fall under the decarbonization options of energy efficiency, improving the energy efficiency in the residential sector. So furnaces, lighting, all of those are part of improving the efficiency of those. Is under the basket of energy efficiency. Renewable energy adoption, another basket of option here, we talk about and we look at the options where you have energy coming from solar, energy coming from geothermal. All of those renewable energy based options are put under this basket, and we look at those technologies. And third one is carbon capture and storage, but this is predominantly at the production and large scale level rather than at the residential sector level. I also include hydrogen, and I put that in the two baskets because this is driven by the way we produce hydrogen today. So a lot of hydrogen that we produce today comes from steam methane reforming using natural gas. So when you use natural gas, we look at adding carbon capture and storage to produce blue hydrogen so that it has a lower GHG footprint. So that's under the carbon capture storage. But then renewable energy options which are being developed is still expensive compared to the blue hydrogen option. But you can produce hydrogen from wind, from solar through electrolysis and splitting water. So hydrogen falls into both of these baskets. What we have done is we have basically developed a model which represents the whole Canadian energy system. And so you see all these provinces. Within Alberta, you have Edmonton, Calgary, two major centers of energy use. But this takes into account all the sources of energy that we use, all the transformation and transmission that you need for the primary energy like natural gas, coal, crude oil, bitumen, transform that into a form that we can use in our demand sector. And here it shows all the demand sectors. So residential is a demand sector, commercial, and so on. So we developed models, and we have developed model which represents this whole Canadian energy system and very detailed Alberta energy system too. And what we support this with a lot of models where we go into the technology development model and machine learning outside of this energy systems model, where we assess the technology and develop data for our larger scale country level and the provincial level model. We go into further detail just to give you a sense of where we go into this. So there is residential sector. Well, here we go into a lot of detailed understanding in terms of where the energy is used, what types of homes you have under the residential sector, where energy is used in these residential sector, what type of equipment you have within these types of end uses, what is their energy intensity, because that helps us in understanding any of these energy efficiency options. If you improve these technologies and this kind of equipment, it helps you in mitigating this much of energy. And this goes on with all the appliances and everything. So pretty detailed model going all the way down to the appliance level. This is what we use then to assess a number of different technologies options. So this just shows you the residential sector, and we have looked at, and this is an ongoing work, but we have looked at several baskets of options for especially energy efficiency improvement in the residential sector. What you see, the curves here is on the x-axis, and the bars, the width of the bar shows the potential for GHG mitigation through implementation of the technologies. And the height of these bars basically shows, compared to the business as usual, what is the incremental cost. Most of the energy efficiency options are attractive compared to the baseline. So these are low-hanging fruit that we call. Some of the key ones that I would like to highlight is you have a lot of these lighting options, which we have been doing, but going to more of the LEDs helps us in mitigating a lot of these GHG emissions. A lot of heating based improvements. So we basically, our furnaces, typically, if you look at, we have low efficiency furnace, medium efficiency furnace, high efficiency furnace. I would categorize a lot of our furnaces are within that low to medium or to medium energy efficiency furnace. High efficiency furnace, we are talking about 95% efficiency. So as this, we keep on changing, and with the incentives, keep on changing it to high efficiency furnaces, you will see that the energy consumption in heating will go down. So improving those and then shifting to more high efficiency furnace will help quite a lot. And thus you see in terms of these are the options. We have a lot of potential for GHG mitigation. Boilers the same way. And then the appliances with high efficiency appliances. I mean, that again, improving the efficiency will keep on going. On this side, you see a lot of these, the design, the building design component of this. So in terms of the types of window, the types of wall, more insulation, more efficient insulation. When we put those, that helps us in improving the efficiency. Also, ground source heat pump and also helps us in improving the efficiency, but the cost is high, and that's what this shows. So this kind of, major sectors and component of the energy use that we do in the residential sector helps us in improving that. This is on the transportation sector, but transportation sector, again, in the residential sector and the neighborhood setting, we are mostly talking about the passenger vehicle, buses, and then the cars, and then trucks. Those are, again, the personal use of trucks. So again, in there, more of the use of high efficiency vehicles could help us in reducing GHG emissions. And then some of these electrical vehicle, EVs, and then also in terms of renewable fuels like biodiesel or bioethanol could help in reducing GHG emissions. Now, I want to talk a little bit about also in terms of the hydrogen production, and this is kind of, coming up. A lot of interest is there in implementing hydrogen potentially for the residential sector. And so just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, I talked about hydrogen. Hydrogen we produce today from natural gas through steam methane reforming. We are one of the largest producer of hydrogen in Canada. Out of about 4 million tons of hydrogen that we produce, we use 2.5 million tons of hydrogen, mostly in our oil sands sector. But you can produce it through a number of other processes like green processes. I won't go into detail, but the key is that this hydrogen which is produced, transported to different sectors, and it could be used in a number of different sectors. So just to think in the simple way is, wherever you use natural gas, you can use hydrogen. Either you can blend it with natural gas, or you can use hydrogen on its own. Depending on at what percentage level you use hydrogen, you'll look at the equipment, you'll have to look at the infrastructure to transport that. So here, what we have done, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we did in terms of supporting the hydrogen roadmap, in terms of developing some numbers on the potential mitigation of emissions in the residential sector through blending of hydrogen in the existing natural gas stream. So we talk about a lot of infrastructure and then a lot of data in terms of production of hydrogen, distribution of hydrogen, transmission of hydrogen to the residential sector. So what our assumption is looking at a hydrogen production plant in Fort Saskatchewan, transporting hydrogen through pipelines to the Edmonton gates, where it is blended in the natural gas pipeline, up to 15% by volume. Typically, if you can go up to 20% by volume, you don't have to change a lot of infrastructure for transportation and handling, but beyond that, you will have impact on the infrastructure. So you'll need to have infrastructure specific to hydrogen transport and utilization. This was for Edmonton, 37 kilometers. We also looked at transporting hydrogen produced here to Calgary through a pipeline, a 337-kilometer pipeline, or you could have a hydrogen plant in Calgary too. But looking at this, and especially then producing, then transporting it to the city gates, and then this is going through the distribution pipeline to the residential sector. If you look at 15% blending of hydrogen in the natural gas pipeline for utilization in the residential sector, we could look into a mitigation of about 0.5 million tons per year. And we looked at different sectors, but in terms of the residential sector, we could look at about 500,000 tons of mitigation per year over a planning horizon of 2023 all the way to 2050. This, I won't go into detail, but what this just shows is in terms of residential sector, GHG mitigation is one category of work. This just shows the whole sector where we could blend hydrogen. Typically, what we look at is, and these are all the hythane, we call hythane is hydrogen plus methane when it is mixed. In 15% blending is hythane, you can have different percentages of hydrogen blend into this. But again, if you compare this with the current cost, I mean, it is still expensive to what we use from natural gas, but the question is in terms of how much are we willing to pay to mitigate carbon dollar per ton, and that's where the decision falls in. A lot of these options where you see a combined hythane, we looked at, because the footprint for a residential sector is still small, so we looked at all the sectors together in terms of blending hydrogen in the natural gas stream. You could see some of these still have very small footprint. And this has gone, the work that we do in terms of a lot of mitigation technologies, assessment of technology has gone into a number of these places and used by a number of these agencies and industry. So just to put some key points here and summarize this, a lot of work that we do is in terms of looking at the overall impact. You do change the technology in residential sector, it does have an impact whole system, along the whole system. So our focus is on assessing the whole system. Energy efficiency options for the residential sector are the low-hanging options, most attractive options. So whatever you could do to improve your efficiency, you will that would be attractive. The challenge is that energy efficiency could get you to a certain extent of mitigation. The amount of mitigation that we need is much larger. Hydrogen blending could be an option, and there needs to be, in terms of the policy development, in terms of support, because currently it is expensive. And then integration of renewables like solar PVs in the residential sector particularly, and also I would say geothermal wherever it is available. That could be also be adopted in the residential sector to reduce your GHG footprint. And so I'll stop here. The number of different agencies have funded this, but special contributions have been made for more than 200 graduate students who have gone through the program, contributing to each and every assessment. So thank you, and I'll be happy to discuss any of the questions that you have.
Thank you, Amit. That was excellent. And thank you to Sandeep and Nilusha as well for your presentations earlier. I really appreciate that all your presentations provided us with something to really think about in terms of our own management of our households and our transportation decisions and so on. I think all of us can find some point of connection with what you said. We'll move on to the Q&A session then. We have about 15 minutes or 13 minutes or so for that. The two options are available to you. One is to avail yourself of the chat and put your question in writing. A few of you have already done that I'll be getting to in a moment. The other option is to raise your hand. You'll see at the bottom of your screen the react button, a little heart with the raise hand option under that, in which case we'll simply call on you to turn on your camera and your microphone and join in the discussion. So let me go to the questions that we received in the chat. From Gary Buchanan, he says, and I think that you spoke to this, Amit, wouldn't another option, and I think he's saying, an option rather than energy efficiency in dwellings would be switching to energy for dwellings away from GHG emitting sources to non-GHG emitting sources. Can you talk about sort of the comparative value of those two approaches?
Hey, so yes, excellent question. See, the challenge is you could probably do and switch to renewable sources because technology is available. You have solar PV. Yes, we can provide our homes with solar PV. But how much are you willing to pay? That's the key question. I mean, government could support to a certain extent and provide you incentives, but how much is the cost of energy that we are willing to pay? That basically is the key deciding factor. We do have homes which could be built 100% on renewables, but the cost of those homes are much higher. So to answer this question is in terms of how do we slowly transition? See, there are different ways of doing it. Government provides incentives. We have carbon tax in Alberta. We have other forms of incentive to promote renewable energy here, both at the provincial and federal and municipal level. But the key is that the technologies needs to improve and the cost competitiveness needs to be there. And that's where kind of you will see a lot of transition. The question in terms of whether we can technically do it, we can do it today. It's more about, to me, is more about the economics of how much are we willing to pay.
Thanks, Amit. The next question maybe go to Sandeep or Nilusha. Could you expand on why, this is from Fiona Gregory, could you expand on why mature neighborhood homes are higher emitters despite having smaller average size?
Thanks for that question. And I'll invite Nilusha as well to add to what I'm going to say. So mature neighborhoods, they're built, at least 2 or 3 decades earlier, and some of them are much older. So as you can imagine, these are older homes built at the building codes, which were not as up to date and energy efficient as the new building codes are. There are a lot of leaks throughout the homes. The appliances are older as well. So those are the reasons that I can think of. But Nilusha, do you want to add something?
Thanks, Sandeep. You covered almost all things. Like as Amit explained, like 65% of the energy used for space heating. So these homes in mature neighborhoods, their energy use intensity is very high, especially because of energy leakages through windows and doors, especially during winter time. You can practically see that like if you go to like most of the apartments and some of the older houses in mature neighborhoods, you can feel the cool air is coming through windows, like in older houses, especially in winter. So there's some energy leakages happen very oftenly. So that's increase the energy use intensity of these houses in mature neighborhoods. It increases the greenhouse gas emissions.
Is
I
there-
wanted to, if I may, Dave, just a question back to Amit about the first question that was asked. If natural gas is mixed with hydrogen for residential, use, would that then require changes to the appliances?
So, depending on what level of blending you do. So our work has looked at both, and then so in terms of blending level, let's just talk about that first. Is if you go up to 20% by volume in the natural gas system, you don't have to change your infrastructure currently. There has been experimental work done on this. There has literature modeling work done on this, which typically talks about up to 20% by volume. You don't have to change your appliances. You don't have to change your infrastructure. But once you start going beyond that, so beyond 20%, then you need change in the infrastructure. I mean, some would argue potentially you could go a little bit further, but there is a lot of work going on, a lot of demonstration project is going on this. But from our point of view, if you go beyond 20%, then you change the infrastructure, you change the appliance too. There are technology providers who are developing appliances where you use 100% hydrogen. They're not only at the residential level, but also at the industrial and commercial level where they're developing turbines, they're developing boilers, which is 100% hydrogen. So again, beyond that, then you will have to 20%, you will have to change the appliances.
Great, thank you. I see Stephen Buffo has his hand up. Before going to Stephen, I just wanted to go to the remaining question that's in the chat from Kathy Crooks, and I guess this would be directed to Amit as well, as it's on the question of blended hydrogen. Excuse me. Do you see blended hydrogen as a highly likely option in the near future? In which industries would hydrogen offer the most mitigation? And overall, how much offset of GHG mitigations might we see from this source, and that versus solar?
Yeah, okay. Good question. See, in terms of blended hydrogen, so depending on what sector you are talking about, and do we have options for decarbonization? A lot of options for decarbonization of those sectors. So if we think about residential sector, let's say first, my sense is that, hydrogen blending and using that is still expensive compared to the current system. But I think that as the technology improves, and if we are able to, because currently we do produce hydrogen from natural gas, and that cost of hydrogen is much lower compared to anywhere in the world. Even if we add carbon capture and storage, that is still cheaper. But in terms of the residential sector, my sense is that more of the solar energy and more of the renewables will penetrate as the cost keeps coming down. We could still do a blended hydrogen. We are developing and focusing, there is interest in developing hydrogen communities where everything is provided by hydrogen. So, in near future, I still think that there would be blending could be a way to go. But as the technology improves, as we have more green hydrogen coming in through electrolysis, if the cost comes down for the electrolyzers, we might see further shift. But solar is another option. The other key thing I'd also say is that if you look at electricity use in the residential sector, it depends a lot on what sources of electricity is coming. As more and more renewables penetrate the grid system, you will see that those GHG footprint goes down. So you don't even have to do much at the residential level. It's all the production itself is changing to renewables. In terms of addressing the other industries, yes, hydrogen will have certain advantages in particular industries. So when we look at emission-intensive, trade-exposed industry. So we are talking about more iron and steel, cement, glass, where there is a lot of high-temperature application for natural gas. There you will see potentially hydrogen could penetrate because there are not a lot of options for decarbonization of those industries. So in those industries, you will see a lot of hydrogen penetration. In the transportation sector, you will see, for example, the heavy trucks. So in Alberta, we use a lot of heavy trucks to transport a lot of our goods. Those trucks, they could be electrified, but the challenge with electrification is that the battery size is much larger. And then the longer transport distances also pose a challenge for electrifying these trucks and fleets. There also you will see hydrogen penetrating into those markets, and then you will have hydrogen fuel trucks, which will be a way to decarbonize those sectors. So that's kind of, where I see that the potential of hydrogen would be. In terms of the GHG mitigation, the extent of GHG mitigation depends on what level of hydrogen you are using. If it is 100%, significant amount of GHG mitigation because you are replacing all of the natural gas, if you are. But depending on the blending level, I showed that potentially if you have 15% hydrogen blending in the Alberta energy system, and you're looking at all the energy sectors, you are looking at about 3.5 to 4 million tons mitigation per year. In terms of the solar, I still think that if we are using the source of hydrogen, which is our SMR or the steam methane reforming based hydrogen, which we currently produce with CCS, it would be cheaper. But the application area is different though. Solar can't solve the problem for, as far as current status, can't solve the problem for the higher temperature industries, what I talked about, emission intensive and trade exposed industry. So these have different applications. Maybe there could be solar application, a lot of application in the residential sector, but on the industrial sector, there are still challenges in terms of using other sources.
Thanks, Amit. And okay, Stephen, you've been waiting patiently. I want to make sure we get you in here before we run out of time. Please open up your microphone. There we go.
Okay, thank you very much for the interesting discussions. I was just trying to connect the two dots between the first presentation and the second one, because this first presentation revealed that most of these GHGs are coming from the built environment, and the resources or the components of the built environment, such as pavements, glasses, and all these things contributes to GHG emissions, if I'm right. And looking at the second presentation, its focus was mostly on cost-effective approaches, such as having a high-tane, which is a mix of hydrogen and methane, to combat all these GHGs. But back to having the balance, because we have built environments being active GHGs emitters. So how do we find a way to make the built environment features also cost effective, and also understanding that, yes, Edmonton is a northern city and a winter city, so these built environment design guidelines can still be met in a way that we have cost effective approaches to modifying the built environment, which also contributes much more to the GHGs because of reflective surfaces we have on buildings here, and also much more to do with cost-effective approaches like what the city of Edmonton is currently doing through clean energy improvements and other home retrofitting approaches that they are having ongoing. But how do we connect the dots of making the built environment also cost-effective, as we have found a way to strike a balance between the hydrogen? How can we also strike a balance with built environment features in general as we have more suburbs developing?
Great. Thank you, Stephen. Now we are a little tight on time, but I want to make sure that Stephen gets a response to what's an important question. So who wants to take it?
I can start quickly and then probably you can chime in. To me, your question is more, probably we are very much linked. See, what I talked about the residential sector at the provincial level. So when we talk about Edmonton is the subset. So all these energy for footprint that I showed and the options, those are applicable to Edmonton too, in terms of, energy efficiency options, in terms of providing energy for the, your heating, for example. You talk about all the other uses, those are part of the Alberta energy system. So, industrial sector, cement and all, those are part of Alberta energy system. So I see it's directly connected. It's more like the smaller blocks is Edmonton, Calgary, and then I look at the provincial level.
Yeah, just to add to what Amit said, and again, just in the interest of time, I'm going to be very quick. What we did not consider was the embodied carbon in making of the cement and the glass and things like that, which Amit did touch upon, that if those industries are fed by hydrogen or some other form, then I think then we'll have the best of the both sides, right? And in terms of the built environment, as we said, we're talking about mixed land use, compact development that will bring, lesser amount of cement, use of cement and glass and bricks and so on, asphalt and so on.
Great. Thank you to everyone for great questions and great answers in the presentations earlier. I think it was very, very meaningful and very helpful for all of us. Aisha, do you want to step in and see us out?
Absolutely. We're going to wrap up there. Thank you for your time and expertise, Sandeep, Nilusha, and Amit. Thank you for moderating, Dave. We will be holding more free lunchtime webinar sessions in the new year, including one about property rights. So keep an eye out for that. And thank you everyone for your time today. And I hope to see you at the next one.